As an Egyptian-born Christian, I always wanted to understand my family's religious roots.
Amen.
A faith that shaped my father and his pioneer missionary career. I returned to my father's place of birth to learn more. There, I discover a history I never knew before. For thousands of years, the people here married and raised their children. Very few ventured far beyond this village. And so it would be this one, and that's my father right there. My father became the first Christian missionary ever to be sent from Egypt anywhere, let alone to the rough terrain of Sudan, where my siblings grew up.
That sounds completely so much fun, having hippopotamuses greet you every morning.
And you would have loved it.
I would have been dead.
In my search, I find a treasure, a testament of faith that has endured for generations.
I feel very emotional. I feel very emotional being here.
Today, I travel to Egypt, my father's birthplace, a remote village 150 miles south of Cairo.
We're on our way to Elgar for Saran, which is in the south. It's an area that's called Saidi in Arabic, which means south, but it's another word for village people. So part of finding out my family heritage is to actually go to the village and to see what my life should have been like being there. My father is already there, my sister's already there. A lot of mixed feelings because this is probably the last time my father will visit his hometown. So I'm excited, I'm nervous, and curious to see what we're gonna find there.
We drive south along the Nile to what is called Upper Egypt because of the higher elevation. We stop and ask for directions. My father grew up in an unremarkable village, hardly anyone's heard of.
We're gonna try to find this little village that no one seems to know about, that I've heard about all my life. انت عارفة فين الغرب؟ على طول مش من هنا. طيب شكرا. Finally, after maybe 3-4 hours of driving, we found Elgar fi Sarhan, my father's hometown. So welcome. As you can see, there's not much that has changed in maybe 100 years. Donkeys pulling watermelon, vendors on the streets. It's a farm community, and it is my beginnings.
And all people here are friendly and you're your relatives.
Yes, I know you're my relatives, and I want to get to know everyone here better because this is where my father is from.
Your father here?
Swailem Hennein. Swailem Saran.
Swailem.
Assis Swailem.
Assis, in Arabic, means pastor. Everyone here knows my father left 70 years ago to attend high school, college, and later seminary. But they too have little idea of the impact he made on the Egyptian Christian church in Egypt.
My dad told me that your family left this village for a long time.
Elgar for Sarhan community consists of 17,000 people, and only 1,000 of them are Christian. My father recalls the unique history behind its name.
It's called Elgar for Sarhan. Does that mean anything?
Elgar means the riverside. It is on the riverside of the Nile because in the flood days, the 40 days of the year, the water came all the way to the Jar. And sometimes when it was a very heavy flood, the streets were full of water.
Something about having my father live in Elgar for Sarhan is that I have many relatives. None of them I've met before. So I'm just gonna say that everyone here is my cousin.
My 85-year-old Aunt Afaf, my father's only living sister, cannot imagine any life past this village. Yet, she asked about each family member now living in America. Many she never met.
And he had another sister. He had the sister ورقاء وحليم كانوا the children of the sister.
My family's warmth and love give me a glimpse of the simple life my father came from.
Most people started out as farmers. So there's a lot of farmers here in southern Egypt, which is the life my father started out with. My father was one out of, he says 50, but it was really hundreds, who left his village to go get educated, to become a missionary. And it's all started here.
My oldest sister, Marguerite, also came to accompany me and my father for this visit. I call her Rita. She is not new to the Garf. Before I was born, she and my other siblings lived here in the summers, while my parents went to America to further their education. She helps me paint the picture of how my father grew up.
So, okay, Rita, tell me about, this is where you grew up. Tell me about these buildings.
Okay, this is Baba's main street.
Baba is the Egyptian word for father.
And this is Baba's house, Sithom's house. And as you can see, it was one of the original homes. In fact, when I first came here, this belonged to Baba, but it was only a large yard with the ducks and the cows, and all of the animals were here. And there was a water well, so this was just a farm.
Wow. What are some of the things that you remember doing every day?
The relatives, we'd sit out here, we would suck on sugar cane, we would go to the farm area, get the dates off the trees, eat dates, ride donkeys. It was wonderful. Everybody loved you. Everybody took care of you. You were a community.
I never met the people in my father's community, including my Giddu, my grandfather, or my Teta, which means grandmother. The only connection I have arises from a few old photos and from my father's stories. In them, I see familiar physical features. I yearn to know more about their lives, one with few resources, but rich with love for their family.
I grew up with simple life here, with agriculture and relatives nearby. There was no electricity here.
So maybe the technology and the opportunities for education was better in America for us. I know you moved for the children. Is there anything that's better here?
In here, there was more communal relationships. I mean, no blessing came to one family without having that blessing shared with everybody else. I remember my father, on the day of the market, he would buy extra meat and wrap it very well. And he goes to put them in front of the houses of people. And he would put the package in and would knock and go away, disappear. My father thought that people did not know who was doing that. But people knew who was doing that.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Today, I go with my father on a ferry across the Nile to discover our family burial grounds. I did not realize until now that my father visits this cemetery every year.
So I think learning about yourself, you always have to go back to your roots. And today, I actually had no idea that my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents were buried here. And so this is going to be very emotional for me, especially to see my father. Probably this may be the last time he comes, so I'm here with him.
It's amazing that your family is all together here and you can visit.
In days past, the only way to come here was by boat.
For centuries, Egyptians have buried their loved ones in the desert, just like my ancestors who are laid to rest here.
I don't even know my grandmother's name. So,
Oh, Maria.
so she was Maria
Maria Tadris
Tadros
Abdul Malak.
Abdulmalak. Maria Tadros Abdulmalak, my grandmother's name. Rita remembers her.
She was an angel beget.
Oh, she was wonderful. This area is a specialized graveyard for Christians only. Area over there is specialized for Muslims only.
You know, this reminds me, in the Bible, there's a lot of talk about burial grounds and don't move the burial stones and don't move. It comes from this tradition?
I think so, yes. After all, the Egyptian culture is very well built on the Christian culture. That is, when our Lord was a baby, he brought here. And then the early church in Egypt was a church for the whole Middle East.
So that your family maintained the Christian belief.
Exactly, yes.
So it's a tradition that goes back to...
Always back to the first century, really. We are proud of that, of course.
Sure, of course we should be proud of that. It's beautiful. It was amazing.
It could have been.
I wish we learned this when we were growing up. You hid it from us.
To really understand the Christian faith rooted in me, I need to go back to the 1st century to explore the Egyptian culture of that time, a culture that has its roots thousands of years earlier. The ancient Egyptians who worshipped their pharaohs created an entire society obsessed with the afterlife.
Now, of course, it's a bit primitive, but this is what we do now.
According to Ramaz Atalla from the Bible Society here in Egypt, the Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife opened the door to the Christian faith.
Built in the heart of Egyptians was a search and yearning for eternity since the time of the Pharaohs. Ancient Egyptians built their castles and homes of mud bricks, but their tombs and temples in stone to last for eternity.
The Apostle Mark must have recognized the eternal story within the architecture when he visited Egypt. Theologian Ann Zaki says Mark came to introduce the Christian faith to the Egyptian people.
You have to remember that the Christian church in Egypt has had a very long history because it started with the arrival of St. Mark bringing the gospel here shortly after Pentecost.
Tradition says that John Mark came to Alexandria, that great center of Greek philosophy, with a vision and mission by God to evangelize. Egyptians by the thousands responded because they already had this idea of resurrection. They had the idea of afterlife, but they knew only their rulers could have it. But the Christian message spread very quickly, and soon Egypt became a Christian nation.
Most Christians in Egypt practice this early Orthodox faith, known to the West as Coptic Christianity.
The word Copt itself actually means an Egyptian who's a Christian, Egyptian Christian. And so we were given the name Copt because that was the language that was used. And the Coptic language is still used today in the Coptic Orthodox Mass. That's the only place you will find the Coptic language used.
Coptic Christianity remained the dominant religion in Egypt for over 600 years. In 640 AD, an Arab army of 4,000 men conquered Alexandria. They ushered in Islam, overriding the Christian faith.
When they came as a peaceful power. They tried not to fight against the Christians. But in less than 100 years, that was changed. And they started to force Christians to become Muslim.
That came with a time of hardship. The Christians, taxes were imposed on them, with them choosing to remain Christians, or they else had to convert to Islam.
Today, Egyptian Christians worship in freedom.
In Isaiah, there is this verse, Mubarak Sha'b Masr. I mean, grace to my people in Egypt.
This land that once enslaved God's people later provided a safe haven for his newborn son.
We know that Jesus Christ found a refuge in Egypt after he was threatened by Herod that he will kill all the children, and Jesus was also threatened. So he came to Egypt and lived here for 3 years and a half, which we find it a very big grace for the Egyptians.
A grace that Christians here believe carry them for generations to come.
They have lived through many invaders. They've lived through many periods of history where they have suffered. And despite all of that, they've had an uninterrupted presence. And I think that's what gives the Christian church in Egypt a strong identity and a stubbornness to remain faithful to the God of the covenant.
To uncover the beginnings of my family's Presbyterian faith, I need to go back only about 160 years, to the year 1854, when 4 American women visited Egypt for the very first time. They were the beginning of a new wave of missions to a predominantly Muslim nation.
Mrs. Gillian Lansing, Miss Sarah Dales, Miss Sarah Hart, and Miss Martha McCowan. So these 4 women became some of the most significant missionaries and the initial missionaries to Egypt that the Presbyterian Church sent.
Dr. Tom Taylor from the Presbyterian Foundation in Philadelphia helps me uncover my family's connection to the Presbyterian faith.
An interesting part about this book is it explains the earliest history of the mission work that we started as Presbyterians in Egypt.
Egyptian Christians consist of Orthodox, Catholic, and 16 Protestant denominations, of which the Presbyterians are the largest.
The Presbyterian churches in this country belong to the Synod of the Nile.
The Synod of the Nile is the largest and most inclusive body of Presbyterians in Egypt. They have around 400 churches, congregations. They're operating around 27 or 28 schools, including girls' schools and schools for other kids of all ages. They have operated in their region orphanages. They've operated social service programs very effectively.
Today, Egypt bustles with a population over 100 million people. Navigating through its congested streets often challenges me. But in 1854, when the 4 founding Presbyterian missionaries arrived, only 6 million people lived here. Instead of high-rise buildings holding businesses, they found fertile farms planted with endless rows of beans, wheat, and sugarcane.
Then they noticed that the farmers need to develop their way of farming. So they started a school for farming in Asyut.
According to Dr. Emil Zaki at the Evangelical Theological Seminary in Cairo, the 4 missionaries also noted a lack of hospitals and schools.
From the very beginning, the Presbyterians are part of the community. This is our theology of the church. The body of Christ, all human beings are equal, so we have to work together.
It was Presbyterians who were behind Cairo University. It was Presbyterians who were behind the starting of the American University at Cairo. When it came to Presbyterians, generally, our relationship has been quite strong with the populations where we've been, and that's certainly been true in Egypt.
Here is the book for the minutes of the Synod, 1924. And one interesting thing we found about the church in Asyut, church decided to forbid them from taking communion before they set their slaves free.
In 1924.
Right.
In Egypt.
In Egypt.
That's amazing.
When they came back, they said, no, it's not enough to set them free. You have to sign a paper that you have to teach them and help them find a job. Otherwise, you will not take communion.
So the Presbyterians always took the lead.
Yeah.
In social justice, yeah.
That's really the mission that the New Testament describes in 2 Corinthians and several other places, that we are ambassadors as Christians for Jesus Christ, reconciling the world to God in Christ. And in doing that, What I think we see is that everything and everybody matters because they matter to God, and if they matter to God, they need to matter to us.
In 1924, in fact, it was Presbyterian missionaries who reached out to my grandfather years before my father was born.
My father, after a life of struggle really with alcohol and so on, he accepted Christ as his own Savior. And that was through the evangelical ministry.
Because the nearest church of any kind was over 20 miles away, my grandfather and great-grandfather decided to build the first Presbyterian church right in their village.
And after he got converted, he and my grandfather built this church. And then I was born after that. And my father was a wonderful Bible reader. And he and my grandfather memorized a good bit of the Bible. And my father was a terrific speaker. And so when we had no minister here, my father would act like a minister.
That was nearly 100 years ago, and Egypt's Presbyterian Church grew with a presence, and soon it would begin to impact how the Egyptian government would educate its children.
And so we created the first girls' school in Egypt.
This stunned the Egyptian government that believed in education for boys only.
Of course, there is no teaching for learning for girls. It is not allowed. It is against the custom.
Today, Dr. Mohsen Munir, the superintendent for Ramses School, takes me on a tour. This campus, where my mother once attended, is now open to both girls and boys.
My mother went to this school.
1910.
In 1910, when the school opened, Egyptian newspapers and magazine articles warned that the Presbyterian Church was leading people astray into blasphemy and atheism by educating young girls.
They have changed the culture. 150 years ago, they insisted on a step of opening the schools for girls. And that changed and reformed and reshaped the entire culture about what we do with young girls.
While my mother attended Ramses School in the city, my father studied at Asud College in the country. My grandfather, who learned about Presbyterian private schools for children, helped my father receive a scholarship. He saved every Egyptian pound to help send his son 20 miles away to receive a Christian education.
For high school, I went to Asud College, which is the high school of the Presbyterian Mission, which was about 70 miles away. And so I was a boarder there.
Asud College helped Swailem to start ministry because in Asud College, in the weekends, the college asked all the students to go for ministry to the villages around.
Dr. Tharwood Wahba wrote about my father in his book, The Practice of Mission in Egypt. He documents his rise from a small village to a great missionary.
They go for outreach and evangelize in the nearby villages to spend Saturday and Sunday there to teach, to preach, to do Sunday school, to do literacy classes, and so many activities in these villages.
During his high school years, my father preached in these rural villages. Little did he know how important that village experience would be. My father, Swailem, preached in the countryside during the reign of Farouk, the last king of Egypt. He was a monarch who wanted to strengthen Egypt's agricultural industry.
King Farouk became the king of Egypt, and he was very young. He was 16 years old at that time. And the whole society was looking for the future and for change and for a great development in every aspect of life.
King Farouk's vision captured the interest of yet another American Presbyterian missionary, 73-year-old Dr. Davida Finney, who spent most of her adult life in Cairo.
Davida Feni was a missionary and a daughter of missionaries. So she spent most of her time here in Egypt, and she loved Egypt. So she wrote a book about tomorrow's Egypt, about the future of Egypt in ministry, in education, in health, in development, and so on.
Dr. Finney would be the woman to alter my father's future.
She recruited Swailem Hennein to be part of the lift up of the villages at that time.
My father's early missionary journey to Sudan is well documented, and I'm here at the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia to uncover a little bit more of what led a man from the Elgar for Saran to Sudan.
As part of a class assignment, my father visited Port Sudan and reported his findings to his professor back in Egypt.
It's a file of correspondence of Dr. Davida Finney.
Wow.
And this is a letter.
It's a letter.
By your father.
So this is from my father, November 16th, 1952.
In 1952, Sudan was governed by Egypt and had not gained its independence.
Dear Miss Finney, grace be to you and peace from God the Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. From the boat I write to you, for we are at the harbor of Port Sudan.
He sent these two letters to Davida Finney, telling her about his appreciation for the opportunity she gave to him.
So this is long before Sudan broke into war.
Long before Sudanese independence,
So
which is kind of a precursor of what would happen later, where like a largely Arab North would dominate the non-Arab South.
Right, right. He had no idea at this time that the war would break out and there would be almost 50 years of
conflict, certainly,
conflict. One of the worst conflicts in the world, really. But this is interesting because he is reporting on the journalists, and so that it really is, history is just coming alive at this moment.
But also he mentioned in that when he was in Port Sudan, his heart moved when he saw the children, the Sudanese children, the poor people there, and his heart moved.
The pull my father felt on his heart during his first stop in Port Sudan would become our family's mission.
That vision, in part, came from the American missionaries who were in the seminary, who really gave the image and the picture to the Egyptian church, for the Egyptian church to take the step and say, yeah, you go, and we are supporting you.
He didn't know that after a few years he was going to serve these people and to be part of their life.
The conditions on the whole are very bad, and he chose to take his children there.
We'll be back with more of a testament of faith, a missionary story.
tell me a little bit, Baba, you and Mama were sent out to the southern Sudan. Explain how that happened.
A missionary from southern Sudan came to the Synod of the Nile, my church, and asked them if they could send a missionary supported by Egypt to the southern Sudan. When I came back to Egypt, they met me at the airport, and the church leaders told me not to open up my baggage, but be ready to move on to southern Sudan. And it was all tribal. Around where I started to work, there were at least 6-7 different tribes, but the major ones were Shuluk, Dinka, Nuer, and Anwaq.
Can you imagine Sudan in 1953-54? No electricity, no running water.
The Nile, the hippopotamuses, the crocodile, the snakes, the lions.
They believed that there were spirits and gods living on trees and in the river and even in some animals.
No transportations, nothing at all. It was very hard.
Those gods controlled the water, the rainfall, whatever the trees would produce, controlled everything really in their life.
But both of them, they decide to serve the Lord there.
In 1954, Swailem and Mona Hennein became the first missionary couple from Egypt to go anywhere in the world.
I had the honor, have been honored and privileged to be, some years ago, to be the first missionary of the Egyptian church, supported fully by the Egyptian church.
It's a wonderful memory, really, because not many people experienced wilderness.
And this is the figure of one of the animals that used to come very close to our house, elephant, and we also had hyenas and lion sometimes.
So how did you keep all of us safe from being eaten up?
Well, the Lord really kept us safe. There was not one serious accident in all of this time.
I was born there, so I was 1 through 7 when I lived in Sudan. I was too young to understand the meaning of Baba's work.
The meaning of Swailem's work started when he first learned the Shuluk language and opened a school to train future leaders.
This school was one of the most important schools in the whole South Sudan as a preparatory school because it has a laboratory, it has playgrounds. It was very improved compared with the environment around it.
Here, in a land so different from Egypt, my parents started churches and baptized some of the country's first Christians.
In South Sudan, Swailem did great ministry. He evangelized for many. He baptized about 2,500 people.
In my time, in our area alone, there were at least 1,000 grown up conversions. That does not include the large number of kids who were baptized.
My mother taught the women to read, while my father trained pastors and future leaders. They had no idea how much their work would affect the course of Sudanese history.
He established at least 6 churches. He translated 3 books of the New Testament to the Shuluk language. And these were 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. And it was a great contribution to this tribe.
When we asked him, why do you start with the book of Acts? And he said, because this is a book that speaks about a variety of people coming from different nations and then receiving the same gospel and spreading the gospel to other countries.
One of the main important things that we were learning from the indigenous people, because we were working with people who did not speak our language, who did not know English, but they had their own languages.
I remember the time when he felt that he was not able to communicate with people because he went in his full suit. Then he realized that he needs to take his jacket off and even his shirt to be able to communicate. And that was how he started communicating. Then thousands came in.
My parents also helped build health clinics to help eradicate diseases.
Especially at the time, the malaria was widespread and the mosquitoes were everywhere, and there was typhoid, and of course smallpox was widespread. While I was there, I joined the World Health Organization, and I did work with them about 6-7 years until we celebrated. The last case of smallpox was really near Malakal. And so we got rid of smallpox.
But in 1964, years after Sudan gained its independence from Egypt, a civil war erupted. The Islamic northern government wanted control over the increasingly Christian south.
They turned it to South Sudan, trying to Islamize South Sudan and spread the Arabic language and culture in South Sudan. And they found that the missionaries were an obstacle in front of them. So they kicked all the missionaries out of Sudan.
The governor and the military government became kind of a friend. He said to me, leave everything, but take your family, leave, go away.
He said, I'm not a foreigner, I'm an Egyptian. How, you kicked out the Europeans or Americans. And the governor told him, look, Swailem, it will be a matter of few days.
He told me he was worried for our life. He asked me to leave everything in the south, come back to Egypt, and he promised, he swore a lot that we were going to go back.
He didn't get back to be a missionary again in this area, and his ministry in South Sudan as a full-time missionary stopped there.
My parents were heartbroken to leave South Sudan, but they were leaving behind a legacy that they little understood at the time.
Swailem came back to South Sudan, but this time he was part of a delegation from the World Council of Churches that recruited some leaders of the African countries, including the ex-president of Nigeria at that time, and they asked Swailem to join this delegation. So he went with them to make peace between the North and the South, the government and the people of South Sudan.
We were hoping that the church there would be strong enough to help build a new government in the southern Sudan. And that was the case. Of course, we tried to help build leadership and build that type of government presence in the South Sudan.
During his peacemaking visits back to Sudan, my father noted a tremendous growth in the 7 churches he planted.
In his time, he said, if we have a good day, we had 100, 200 people attend the church. After a few years, and on Sunday when I went, I found about 10,000 people.
One of my own students became a political leader. And the idea was that they wanted freedom for the church, for Christianity, and they wanted to be independent as a country because of tribes and languages and different practices. They desired from that time that they would be independent.
The South did gain its independence. In 2011, 70 years after my parents left, our world's youngest nation, South Sudan, a mostly Christian country, was formed. Its national anthem reflects their strong faith, allowing them to endure 6 decades of war.
During his ministry there, he did actually amazing work. The Lord has used him to bring many people who saw in his life the true life of Jesus Christ, the true love of Jesus Christ as well. I wouldn't be exaggerated if I said hundreds of people accepted the Lord and got baptized because of his testimony. The major resource he had is his vision and the richness of the message he carried. And I think he impacted the life of many people through this.
What he did was a history, a sign, a big shift in the history of the church.
Swailem and Samira's success in South Sudan had been reported and celebrated back home in their sending country of Egypt.
The church felt the ownership of Swailem's mission to South Sudan, and they gave to his ministry. So it was another inspiration for the church here in Egypt. There was a revival in the church in Egypt because of Swailem's ministry in South Sudan.
So while I was in Cairo, waiting to go back to the South Sudan, an invitation came to send me to Kenya. So I accepted.
It was here in Kenya in the mid-60s when my father met with Maasai chiefs, often sharing with them his Christian faith.
I started a program in the village, which was Rural Uplift, helping the farmers live a better life, get literacy, send their kids to school, have a clinic, and so on. Your mother, they take care of the education of the women and making clothes and cooking and things like that. And I was teaching at head of a department with the school there.
In that time, he built many relationships with the African leaders and with the leaders of the country in Kenya, including Kenyatta, the president of Kenya.
He also worked with the government to rebuild the slums of the Pamawani people on the outskirts of Nairobi.
He did a doctorate dissertation because of this experience in uplifting the people.
In his dissertation, he wrote, "Pamwani is not just a place. It's not just the stink of garbage piles and the stench of drainage trenches running along the streets.
Really, I love these people. This is my people. My brethren, my brothers, and my sisters.
Pamwani is also the honest, generous, and kindly people. Many of them have to their credit close to heroic deeds of human significance."
I would teach my people to respond in love. Our ultimate goal is to give glory to the Lord, the Savior, the loving God. And so this is the objective, really. But it's part of the message given to us. Serve the human, everything.
My parents had served in Kenya for 7 years, and once again, government officials asked them to leave. Again, with the promise they could soon return. Reluctantly, my parents took my siblings and me back to Egypt, another difficult transition for our family.
Here in Egypt, for many reasons, he didn't find a place either for himself or for his kids. So, as a result of that, Swailem immigrated to Chicago. he started to be a teacher or a doctor in a university there, but he never forget his role as a missionary, because this was in his heart to serve the people of Egypt and of Sudan as well. It didn't end when Swailem left to America.
In one of my visits to the States, I visited him in Chicago, invited him to come, or actually challenged him if he would be able to give 1 year or a couple of years to help us establish this mission department. And for my surprise, he said, I will come and do that.
So when he came and he started to teach about mission, history of mission, the participation of the church in society and so on, a new beginning happened in the life of the church.
Is the time ripe for us to be obedient to the Lord's calling to the world?
Before that, there was no mission courses, no mission department.
We worked together in just creating curricula for this department, appointing new professors, but he was the prime mover of this department.
A prime mover who helped create the only missions department in a seminary in the entire Middle East.
What I want to tell you now that the mission department is one of the most active departments in the seminary.
Most of the time, the Egyptian church was thinking that the mission is not its role, it's the white man ministry.
So this is an historic moment and a blank sheet of paper in many ways that the Presbyterian Church USA can fill by strengthening its partnership with the Synod of the Nile in this vital area of mission and evangelism.
In 2002, American Presbyterian missionaries visited Egypt once again. They did not come to start churches and schools. Instead, they reported on Swailem's work in training missionaries from the seminary where he first started.
And so we feel as if this is God's moment.
So it was a paradigm shift in the life and the history of the church, that the church felt the ownership of Swailem's mission.
The work that you planted one day in the 50s of the last century is until now working, flourishing.
What happened for the mission department for the Egyptian church is something we will leave it for the history. The history will tell about what Swailem did and what did he put in this department and in the church in Egypt.
Today, I finally grasp my father's devotion to the Egyptian church and to missions, his passion in telling others about God's love. It's a passion that started here in Egypt, a land he always returned to. Egypt houses over 100,000 mosques compared to 3,000 churches. Leaders say that's not enough to serve Egypt's 10 million Christians.
The Evangelical Theological Seminary in Cairo did a study a little while back and determined that up to 70% of the Christians in Egypt don't have access to a congregational church building.
To solve the problem of lack of churches and pastors in Egypt, my father convinced Dr. Sharif Salah to leave his medical practice and start building churches.
In Egypt, no church means no ministry, no Christian ministry. So it is so hard to worship inside our home or anywhere outside the church.
Similarly, there's a real shortage of pastors. So many of these pastors who are right out of seminary, young people right out of seminary, and they will go into maybe a more rural area and they'll be the pastor of 2 or 3 churches at once.
الكالتشر والاستراتيجي هتبقى 580 صفحة.
Together with my father, Dr. Salah made a plan to grow Egypt's churches.
From this point, we start looking for the distribution for the churches and the distribution for Christians all over Egypt.
Back in my father's village, we revisit the church my grandfather and great-grandfather built.
Now, is your father's name here anywhere?
No, I don't.
No, but definitely this is he started this.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Makes me proud.
It's just a wonderful experience to see our beginnings. Our grandfather built the church, so you can see the pattern as from the very older people all the way down to the modern today. There is a flow of Christianity and helping the poor and giving back.
The church stood in the center of this village without a single pastor for 100 years, until now.
I'm just graduated last May from ETSC, Evangelical Theological Seminary in Cairo, which is the same seminary which Pastor Swailem was studied and taught also. Here, every Sunday week, we have about 70 to 100 members come here regularly and be here in the church. The church, as you can see, need to rebuild because from 1925 we are seeking for a new building.
Pastor Lewis hopes he can build soon. In 2016, the Egyptian parliament overturned its 80-year ban on new church construction.
The government under Assisi has given properties to Christians to build churches, and we know that in some cases has accelerated the process of getting the permits to build those churches as well, or helped to loosen zoning laws so that those churches can create their ministries where they need to and where they want to. That's a very heartening thing to see.
So far, the government received over 1,000 requests, and to date, issued only 8 building permits.
To have a license here in Egypt, it's very difficult to get a license from the government, and we're seeking about to get a license, yeah.
I'm sure this new pastor, I know he wants to tear it down and start something new, and I'm excited for that. That at this spot, that God's church will grow, whether we're here or not. Just makes me a little sad and very proud.
I'm back in the Elgar for Saran where this story started. In this unremarkable town, my father began an extraordinary life. It's a story that shows God never wastes our human efforts.
Baba left behind him not himself also, but left him behind his children to carry on his legend. And of course, I'm very proud of him. How can you not be? When the seminary just loves him, the people in Sudan and Kenya, so it's so proud and happy and joyful. And I'm glad he left behind him, you and me, to carry on his legend.
Most of my siblings have followed in my father's footsteps in some way. Almost all of us return at some point to serve in short-term missions. But surprisingly, this is not what my father most desires for us.
Is there something that you would like, maybe I didn't ask you, that you would like your children to know, your great-grandchildren to know?
To get to know the rest of the family, to visit with them once a year or something, and mix with them and accept their hospitality, but to know them. For my grandchildren and my children to know my family, the big family.
I would like not to forget our family. It's so important we keep intact. I think we can help them, they help us, they love us more than you can imagine. And so I think in the future I would like to continue Baba's work and mission in this village.
My father did return to Egypt.
On behalf of my family and the seminary, the Theological Seminary of Cairo, I convey my deep condolences.
To visit the land that he loved.
So نحن نشكر الرب المصر هو مصر سويلم هو سفير لبلادنا إنما نمشي بالسماء.
And the people that loved him.
as we go off and start our own families, we know we have him and my Teta Samira and God to thank for our many blessings.
He was remembered with 2 funeral services, one in the city of Cairo and one back in his village of Elgar, Saran. Where his people never left and where he returned to rest, because Baba knew it would be his final visit.
لأن ابنك يا رب القسيس سويلم خادمك الأمين يا رب اللي خدم حياته كلها يا رب ليك أنت.
I'm so proud of my family. I'm so proud of what they've done. I'm so proud that my ancestors held on to their faith and they've given me a gift of that faith.
I am so proud of my father. He did so much good work, and I believe that he left behind him us, our children, in which we too are following his footsteps.
I have a newfound understanding of my faith as one that is ancient and tested by history.
Never regret any good thing that you do. The small seed you plant one day would bring fruits that you probably wouldn't see, but others will grasp and would affect their life.
I have a gratitude for the legacy of my father's work.
Swailem Hennein is a history. He's a legend. He's my favorite character. And I cannot stop talking about him. I admire him. I love him. And I think his life will shed light for the future and for many.
And I also have hope. Hope for my fellow Christians in Egypt for a better future. Yet, even now, they have something more important than church buildings. They have faith that stubbornly refuses to give up.
I think the success with the seminary is far beyond any human expectations. Leaders of the church praying and spending time in prayer and subjecting the whole work to the Lord. The Lord achieved a miracle there.